At 2:30 p.m. in the southern Caribbean, the calm of open water shattered in an instant. On the radar screens of the USS Jason Dunham, two blips appeared out of nowhere, racing toward the ship. Within seconds, the mystery became clear. Venezuelan F-16 fighter jets were closing in, dropping altitude, engines roaring. The question gripping the crew, was this a drill or the start of something far more dangerous? The Pentagon later described the encounter as a highly provocative move. What made it even more chilling was the timing. Only days earlier, a U.S. counter-narcotics strike had sunk a smuggler's vessel linked to criminal networks, leaving 11 dead. Venezuela's sudden flyby looked less like coincidence and more like a calculated response a dare played out, just feet above the deck of an American warship. Every second of that flyover carried risk. A slip of the trigger, a misread signal, and the standoff could have turned into combat. What looked like a show of force may have revealed something far more valuable: the hidden strengths and vulnerabilities of Venezuela's aging fleet, all captured by American sensors in real time. Stay with us as we uncover the full story behind this high-stakes encounter. And if you want to follow every twist in today's battles of power and technology, make sure you subscribe to Military Power right now. The moment those two Venezuelan F-16 appeared, everything changed. Their silhouettes showed first as distant specks against blue sky, then engines thundered as they descended low, afterburners blazing, propelling each jet toward the USS Jason Dunham. They didn't circle wide. They flew tight, almost brushing the horizon above the ship's deck. The roar echoed, waves churned. Sailors paused what they were doing, eyes fixed upward, fingers poised at consoles. The tension was electric. On the bridge, radar operators watched every flicker. The radar screen lit with two fast-moving dots. The air smelled of salt and danger. These jets didn't merely overfly. They dove in, making passes at low altitude, forcing Dunham's crew to shift, track, prepare. Anti-air gun mounts were manned. Missile systems went to alert status. The ship didn't fire. It did not swerve. It held its course, abiding by rules of engagement. The captain's order was clear: do not provoke unless absolutely necessary. If fired upon, respond. If not, maintain composure. The destroyer's radar and sensor array caught every movement of the F-16, the whisper of turbines, the heat trails, the flick of a winglet. Every inch of space between sky and ship felt charged, fragile, poised on a knife edge. From U.S. statements confirmed by Reuters, these jets flew near a U.S. Navy destroyer in the Caribbean, in international waters. The Pentagon labeled the flyover a highly provocative move. They came after a U.S. strike that claimed 11 lives aboard a vessel allegedly tied to drug trafficking. That earlier strike had already stirred a hornet's nest of tensions. Back on deck, the crew exchanged glances. Is this routine? Is this reconnaissance? Or a show of force? Communications channels crackled. Visual identification requests were made. Distance estimations were shouting in every sensor readout. How close is too close? At what point does proximity become threat? Dunham did not fire. She did not drop anchor. She continued forward, shields raised, watchers alert. The seriousness of this moment is underscored by one key fact. This was not merely theatrics. The Venezuelan jets entered airspace in such a way that they interposed themselves above a U.S. warship operating under rules of international law. They took risks that could have triggered disaster: a misinterpreted signal, an equipment malfunction, a hasty order. Only seconds separate caution from catastrophe. Why would Venezuela risk such a dangerous approach? What message were they hoping to send? Was it about power, intimidation, or testing boundaries? Doubly worrying. Each risky maneuver gives the U.S. Navy more than just a headline. It yields data thermal signatures, flight paths, reaction times. It reveals what Venezuelan hardware can do or fail to do. Yet the stakes were bigger than that. Americans watch closely when their warships are challenged. Their doctrine around freedom of navigation, international waters, Rules of engagement requires them to respond with restraint. Here, restraint became a weapon in itself, a tool to avoid escalation, but also to preserve moral and legal high ground. In that charged moment, as jets roared overhead and radar operators held their breath, the boundaries between daring and mistake blurred, and Venezuela pressed forward into that blurred line. Even before the F-16s roared overhead, the Jason Dunham, tensions between Washington and Caracas were already stretched to breaking point. A few days earlier, a U.S. strike in the Caribbean had sunk a Venezuelan speedboat and killed 11 people. American officials claimed that the vessel was operated by members of the gang Tren de Aragua, accused of drug trafficking. That strike had set off alarms in Venezuela, which denounced the action, calling it an illegal use of force and an affront to sovereign rights. In that charged atmosphere, every action from either side took on outsized meaning. For Maduro's government, the flyover of the F-16 seemed to serve as a statement. We are watching, we are capable, and we will not be pushed aside. Venezuelan state media quickly seized on the moment. Headlines in Caracas praised the jet's proximity, framing it as a proud moment of defiance. Reports emphasized the máquinas acercándose al monstruo, machines approaching the monster. The visuals, F-16s cutting through low clouds, engines blazing, the destroyer a silent giant below. The story painted a narrative of strength against encroachment, a message intended for both the domestic audience and global viewers. Venezuela will not bow. However, beneath the bold imagery lies greater risk than reward. Because while it might look powerful on television, sending aging jets dangerously close to a U.S. warship in international waters invites dramatic consequences. The U.S. does not merely see theater, it sees opportunity. That flyover gave American intelligence and surveillance systems real data: flight vectors, thermal signature of the engines, reaction times of the crew aboard Jason Dunham. What was meant to intimidate may instead have revealed vulnerabilities. Maduro may have believed that demonstrating daring would shift perceptions. Instead, that demonstrative act exposed details about his military's actual capabilities, details that should probably have remained unknown. Moreover, the symbolic value of this action comes at a high price. Escalation looms large when military forces press the envelope. One false move in communication channels, one sensor misread, one engine misfire could turn what was supposed to be a message into a miscalculation. Washington has already warned that such actions are highly provocative and has signaled that further interference with U.S. counter-narcotics or military operations could lead to more aggressive responses. And here's where the twist hits. Instead of successfully projecting deterrence, shocking the U.S. or altering the balance, Caracas may have done exactly the opposite. In showing off by risking proximity, Venezuela let slip more than just bravado, it revealed its limits. It exposed to U.S. systems exactly what its F-16s can and cannot do. It showed how quietly powerful modern surveillance is. It handed intelligence to the other side under the guise of strength. The message from Caracas, intended to unsettle, may have ended up strengthening the hand of its rival. As the Venezuelan F-16s cut low above the USS Jason Dunham, what looked like a high-stakes stunt was becoming something far more dangerous and far more revealing. Every radar sweep done by Dunham, every thermal signature left by the afterburners, every radio or communication frequency used by those jets was observed, intercepted, logged. U.S. military sources told Reuters that the flyover took place in international waters, making it legal under international law, but also placing it squarely in the crosshairs of U.S. intelligence collection. Radar doesn't just see objects, it reveals speed, climb rate, maneuverability. When those Venezuelan F-16s banked, descended, or changed throttle, Dunham's sensors captured the performance envelope, the limits that tell what the jets really can do. Thermal sensors traced heat plumes from the engines. Signal intelligence systems likely monitored communication channels. What might have looked like provocation to many was instead a rich source of data for those who know how to listen. That isn't speculation. Reuters reports that the Pentagon considers these flights highly provocative, not only because of the risk of collision or misunderstanding, but because such moves offer the U.S. military a chance to assess Venezuela's aging fleet in action. For example, how quickly can those F-16s climb once they turn on afterburners? How vulnerable are they to ambient thermal noise? What radar cross-section do they present when angled against sea clutter or horizon? All details that modern warships like Jason Dunham are built to detect and exploit. Imagine giving your rival the test answers before you even sit down for the exam. Venezuela may have thought it was flexing, but in doing so, it handed over intelligence valuables. Response times of U.S. sensors, possible blind spots, signature leaks. While U.S. leadership condemned the flyover, its intelligence apparatus quietly collected what could become strategic advantages. This kind of data isn't just for bragging. It can inform where radar must be improved, where tactics need adjustment, and where caution must replace bravado. For instance, if one jet reveals a delay in throttle response, or an engine leaks more heat than expected, those are exploitable details. Over time, pattern accumulation builds a map, and maps are wartime gold. Yet despite all that gathering, the Venezuelan side may not realize exactly what they've exposed. Their intention was to send a message of strength, a warning. But instead of merely unsettling Washington, they may have handed U.S. forces a clearer picture of what Venezuelan air capabilities are, how vulnerable they remain, and precisely what improvements would matter most. So now the question looms, did Venezuela just deliver to the U.S. a gift no one in Caracas likely meant to hand over? A treasure trove of actionable data masked as a display of power. The balance of power in these waters is not just about who flies lower, it's about who can see farther, think faster, and connect more pieces at once. Venezuela's F-16s tell a long story before they even reach the horizon. Bought in the early 1980s, the fleet has spent years wrestling with part shortages and stalled upgrades after a U.S. arms embargo cut off official spares in 2006. One reason officials in Caracas pursued stopgaps from Russia, China, and a patchwork of sources just to keep jets serviceable. The result is uneven readiness, with only a portion of airframes available on a given day. That isn't rumor. It's a trend noted for years by major outlets and defense reporting. Across the water, the U.S. side looks and behaves differently. While an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer like USS Jason Dunham scans the sky with its Aegis combat system, and SPY-1DV radar built to pull targets out of coastal clutter, the wider American network adds layers that a single jet can't match. Airborne early warning aircraft like the Navy's E-2D Hawkeye stitch the battle space together, feeding a shared picture to ships and fighters through Link 16, the encrypted data link that lets U.S. and allied units pass tracks, messages, and cues in near real time. In short, one jet sees a ship. The U.S. network sees the neighborhood. This difference isn't academic, it's visible on the map. As tensions rose this month, U.S. F-35 stealth fighters were spotted landing in Puerto Rico, a signal that Washington was willing to put fifth-generation eyes and ears within reach of the Caribbean lanes. The Pentagon had already blasted the Venezuelan flyover as highly provocative and warned that U.S. commanders were authorized to shoot down threats if necessary. The message was blunt. If Caracas keeps pressing, it will be pressing into a force that pairs stealth aircraft, Aegis destroyers, and networked surveillance built precisely to outdetect and outdecide older jets. Meanwhile, the Venezuelan F-16s bring speed and bite, but they carry the weight of time. Airframes from the 1980s demand careful maintenance. Embargoes make that harder, and sanctions enforcement has even led to U.S. indictments over attempts to smuggle restricted aircraft parts. Keeping a fleet viable under that pressure is possible but costly, and it rarely delivers the deep modernization that changes a fight against a 21st century opponent. Contrast that with how the U.S. fights. A Hawkeye orbit can spot low flyers and push cues down the Link 16 net. A destroyer's SPY-1DV can track and classify, and a stealth fighter can arrive unannounced, armed with sensors as valuable as missiles. None of this relies on a single platform showing off at low altitude. It relies on a web ships, aircraft, satellites, and relays moving information faster than an opponent can react. The Navy calls Link 16 a backbone for a reason. It keeps every shooter and sensor on the same page. So when two aging F-16s streak close to a modern US warship, the spectacle lasts seconds, but the implications echo much longer. Caracas can generate a headline and a burst of pride at home. Washington can generate a dataset, a layered response, and if needed, overwhelming force. That is the strategic asymmetry playing out here. One side displays, the other integrates. It's why the US could escalate presence with F-35s on short notice, and why a destroyer like Jason Dunham can absorb a flyby without blinking, because the ship is never really alone. Here lies the twist. That dramatic low pass looks like strength on camera, but in the cold light of capability, it proves something else entirely. A technology gap that favors the networked side. Venezuela can rattle nerves for a moment. The United States can shape the fight for as long as it chooses to stay. And in a region where minutes matter, the side that sees first and shares fastest holds the real power. When the news broke that two Venezuelan F-16 jets buzzed close to the USS Jason Dunham in international waters, the reaction in Washington was swift and harsh. Pentagon spokespeople didn't mince words. They called the flyby highly provocative, saying it was more than just a show. It was interference with U.S. counter-narcotics operations. The word reckless floated around, capturing the concern that such close passes with aging jets and fast reactions could lead to miscalculation or worse. Within hours, Washington signaled that it was not going to respond with silence. U.S. military posture in the Caribbean was scaled up. 10 F-35 stealth fighters were deployed to Puerto Rico, operating out of the former Roosevelt Roads base in Ceiba. These stealth jets aren't just symbols. They represent a dramatic leap in capability, with radar-evading design and advanced sensor packages. Alongside that, multiple warships were moved into the region to bolster naval presence. Maritime patrol aircraft were also stepped up, intensifying surveillance of key sea lanes. Every addition reinforced the message. The U.S. is watching and ready. Defense officials framed the response carefully. They emphasized restraint. No shots fired, no escalation initiated, but stern warning made. American leaders said that any direct threat to U.S. assets or personnel would be met with force. According to a U.S. Department of Defense statement, the Venezuelan maneuver strongly advised against further attempts to interfere with U.S. counter-narcotics and counter-terror operations. The language was clear. Bold behavior might earn headlines, but crossing certain lines would carry consequences. Meanwhile, political leaders in Congress stepped into the conversation. Some lawmakers called for more aggressive policies toward drug traffickers linked with Venezuela. Senator Marco Rubio, for instance, renewed calls to intensify action against criminal groups and signaled that the U.S. would press harder, not only in drug interdiction, but also in holding Maduro's regime responsible. But even among U.S. policymakers, many warned that any misstep could spark a serious confrontation, stressing that Washington needs both resolve and caution. The strategic message from Washington came into sharp focus. It is possible to respond without recklessness, and strength lies not just in weapons, but in discipline and readiness. Deploying the F-35s, increasing naval and aerial patrols, and making public warnings all show that the U.S. intends to control escalation. They are building warning paths, actions with consequences, though still falling short of open conflict. Now the question looms larger than the flyby itself. Is the Biden era or Trump era U.S. stance moving toward permanent military buildup in the Caribbean? Will future probes from Venezuela risk being met with force rather than just warnings? And crucially, is this warning the final one, or merely the first in a series of increasingly tense encounters. As the sun dipped low over the Caribbean, the roar of two Venezuelan F-16s had already faded into silence, but the echoes of their stunt still ripple far beyond the horizon. What looked dramatic in the skies above the USS Jason Dunham was not the triumph Caracas wanted it to be. Instead of intimidating the U.S. Navy, the flyover handed Washington a rare gift, a flood of intelligence. Pentagon officials described the maneuver as highly provocative and reckless, warning that the risk of miscalculation was real. Yet by holding fire and staying calm, the destroyer turned a provocation into an advantage, capturing valuable data on Venezuela's aging fleet. The lesson is clear. In modern military standoffs, power isn't just about who flies closer or louder. It's about who can keep their nerve, who can transform moments of danger into moments of knowledge. For the US, restraint did not mean weakness. It meant turning the tables without firing a shot. For Venezuela, the cost of symbolism may have been far higher than they intended, exposing vulnerabilities instead of hiding them. So now the question falls to you. Was this a daring act of defiance or a strategic mistake that will haunt Caracas in the months ahead? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Military Power for more deep dives into the hidden stories behind today's global flashpoints.